Thank you for those who are joining promptly on time. We're up at about 167 participants so far, counting. So whilst we're waiting for people to connect in, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat function in the way I think those who have been to a few regen sessions have be familiar with, you can tell us where you're at, where you're calling it, where you're coming in from. We can award a prize to the furthest away caller, if that still means anything in today's world. Usually ask you, okay, sit down. Councillor Ireland and Dorset, welcoming. Sunny Leeds, apparently. Yeah, the local weather forecast is always helpful. I won't ask you for your local lockdown kind of rules, because firstly, that would take too depressing, and secondly, probably you won't know them anyway. Thank you for saying you're looking forward to it. Kelly in Brentwood there. Sandra from Cambridgeshire. Guess that's a colleague of yours, Cheryl. Got South Wales, Monmouthshire represented. Not so sunny Cornwall. Okay. Prestwick, that's probably the furthest away so far. It definitely seems to be, if anyone wants weather forecast, definitely getting sunnier further up the country, I think, is the in the Midlands. Good representation from Wales, Bristol, Perth and Kinross Council. Okay, we're just I'm just waiting for us to tick over to a couple of hundred attendees. We had about 250 registered today, I think, so or 380, I think Hannah said right at the end. So obviously a popular session and an interesting, important area. Leo down in Devon. Welcome, Leo. Okay. Well, we're over 200 and we're sort of 3 or 4 minutes after 2 o'clock. So I think let's make a start. We just move our chat function over out of the way a little bit. So, welcome everyone. I'm Merlin Hyman. I'm Chief Exec of Regen. I'll be kind of facilitating, chairing, if you like, today this session on local leadership to transform our energy system, which I guess kind of marks the launch of a paper of that name, which you can find on our website. So we actually launched the paper before the summer, but this is the kind of launch event. So we've put it out before the summer. Now we're formally launching it. Let's put it that way. I'm broadcasting from my home in Bath, as befits recent restrictions and announcements today. You can see my usual bookshelf in the background. And we've got an excellent panel who I will introduce for you in a minute. So agenda today, we're going to start by discussing the paper, findings of the paper, and our kind of thinking about local leadership to transform our energy system with Hazel, who is the lead author and head of delivery at Regen, and has kind of led our work for a long time, really, with local leaders and local government. So Hazel will talk a bit about the paper, some of the key themes, then and I'll ask her some questions, and we're then going to go into essentially discussion with our 4 kind of panelists. We'll start with Patrick, who I think most of you in this space will have come across or know or heard of or met at various events when such things were allowed. So welcome, Patrick. We'll then we'll talk to Steve, who is the DSO Transition Manager at SSSEN, so particularly around that interface between the energy system, the energy infrastructure, the pipes, the wires, and local government. And then we have Matthew, who's the chair of Energy Capital, and the West Midlands kind of initiative to try and drive energy agenda forward in that part of the world. And Cheryl French, who is Programme Director at Cambridgeshire County Council, has been leading a number of innovative energy projects for quite a while now. So that's our panel. So that's great. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Just in terms of the of the topic and the for today, I guess Regen's always been a very strong believer that you can't, the path to net zero, the path to zero carbon, doesn't just go through Westminster, or just doesn't go around Southwest One and sort of stop. We're going to need, if we're going to achieve the kind of scale of transition we're talking about here, we're going to need leadership from across the country. We're going to need leadership from the great cities, regions, areas of the whole country. And we're also going to need to bring this is a transition that involves influence. It affects people in their wallets and what they see around them, and the way they use and engage with energy. And so we're going to need, to bring people along with us on this transition, engage them, and that's very unlikely to happen just through a kind of set of national policies. That's much better done with engaging with people where they live in their local communities. And it's, of course, pretty self-evident, and just reading out some of the names of the people on this call and where you're all calling in from, that what works in central London isn't right for Cornwall or Perthshire or Norfolk, and different again, no doubt, in Birmingham. So lots of aspects of energy and zero carbon are essentially local, and clearly one size fits all solutions are not going to address all of those kind of challenges. So we've always had that strong view that we need to, we've always worked with local authorities, local leaders, or local communities, local people, to try and chart out, and done a lot of work trying to chart out the path to zero carbon at that kind of more local level. And so we were really keen when we came to our sort of series of papers we've been working on called Decade to Make a Difference, our thought leadership papers, if you like. We were always really keen that we were going to do that in one of the key focuses was, how do we release local leadership? How do we, to really drive forward this agenda? Now, as I imagine Hazel might mention, when she started this paper, kind of beginning of the year sort of time, we'd come out of 2019, we'd had this tremendous drive of climate enthusiasm, young people on the streets, striking from schools, and government, policymakers has responded, net zero targets. And 2/3, I think it was, the latest number, Hayes might know, of local authorities have responded by declaring climate emergencies. And I guess in writing this paper and thinking about this year, we thought, right, okay, so the question is now they're all committed, they've declared their climate emergency, what are they going to do? And let's look around and look at some of the great practice, best things people are doing, bring that together and help inspire people and kind of give people an idea of what they can do. Clearly, the context of this year has turned out to be a little bit different to that, and we've had another crisis, and a very immediate one that has had huge effects on local government and local leaders as well as everyone else. But I think that and we're very much, today's announcements tell us, very much still in that. But I think it does, in some ways, it makes this whole agenda and how we respond to it even more important. And there is a quote in the paper I thought I'd just read out to you, which is from a group of central bankers, including Andrew Bailey from the Governor of the Bank of England. Perhaps central bankers not best known for their kind of soaring rhetoric, but it was interesting to hear them express it as, this crisis offers a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rebuild our economy in order to withstand the next shock coming our way, climate breakdown. Unless we act now, the climate crisis will be tomorrow's central scenario, a bit of central bankers jargon there. And unlike COVID-19, no one will be able to self-isolate from this. So as we think about the building back, whilst we still deal with the effects of pandemics, we think about the building back agenda. This is a really critical moment of how we go about that, and how the kind of the local economic revival can go along with planning and tackling the climate crisis. Okay, so that's why we thought this was such an important area. Let's now bring in Hazel, the author of the paper. Hazel, do you just want to give us a quick kind of intro to some of the kind of key themes of the paper, the key things that you were kind of thinking of as you were bringing this together?
Yeah, thank you. I've been working with local authorities for about 15 years on decarbonisation, and so this paper is kind of my think piece about all the different things that local authorities and local government can and should do, and trying to bring it together into a coherent framework that makes some kind of sense. So to that end, we put together a net zero city hall diagram, which I think you can see on the slides, Hannah. Thank you. That's kind of an attempt to really put some shape around the problem. It's got, it reflects the shape of the paper, which has got 3 different sections. So running along the bottom, there's the foundations for action, and those are kind of the key enabling conditions that need to be in place to enable action within a local government. Then we've got 7 pillars across the middle, kept getting more and more pillars, so it got wider and wider. But trying to focus in on those delivery areas that are really important to achieving net zero. And then a way that you can get to the top of that delivery, up the steps, up the side, through 3 innovative approaches to delivery. So working with private sector, working with the community sector, and taking part in innovation trials. And I've had questions about, so which of these are the most important points of the paper? And the answer is I don't know. I think they're all important. It's really vital that there's a coherent look. So when we've been doing work for local authorities on their trajectories to net zero, you can't reach net zero without doing everything. And so this kind of diagram is an attempt to show that. But I guess the other key point is that no one organisation can lead net zero. It's not something that national government can do on its own. Certainly not something local government can do on its own. So this kind of partnership approach of being the convener, the facilitator, being at the centre of action, and unlocking others within a local area is really important. So unlocking citizen engagement and unlocking businesses and developers and housing. So this diagram is an attempt at putting it all together into one place. So setting it all out. I was going to talk about four areas in detail. Is that all right to go on to that, Merlin?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, having said that, it's all equally important. I'm going to just talk about 4 areas and pick those out. Mainly because otherwise we'd be here all day with me talking, and I think there'll be plenty more to get from the panel discussion. So first of all, those key foundations that we think each area needs to have in place, those came through talking to stakeholders from leading areas and thinking about why those areas are at the forefront of the energy transition. So one of the key learnings I've had from working with local government is that different areas are at different places in their journey. And if we're going to get to net zero, we need everyone to be at the same place, to be much further along than we are currently. So these are those enabling conditions, those foundations that we've seen put in place in those leading areas. So the first one, I mean, the most obvious thing is that those areas that are leading action have got resources and money dedicated to decarbonisation of energy tasks, essentially. But why was kind of the question behind that. Why has one authority chosen that? So long-term political commitment to the cause has been what has enabled Nottingham to build up its energy team. Oxford City Council's got a big energy team for the size of the authority. And it's just because those areas have seen, when they've been at election time, going around door stopping, that's something that's on the agenda of the local people. So it's translated into long-term political commitment, which is then translated into teams, which have then been able to generate income, which has meant a bigger team, and it's kind of been a cycle. I don't really have the answer of how you engender that in an area without it, but it's certainly something for discussion. So the second thing is that although we see local government as really key to action, it's not the only organisation that needs to do things. So you need an effective governance structure in place that unlocks action from all the other partners. So had a good look at Manchester and their climate change partnership, which brings together organisations, I think it's about 60 organisations, and those organisations then have direct control of around 20% of the city's direct CO2 emissions, whereas when we did analysis for somewhere like South Gloucestershire Council, the council itself has direct control of just 1% of emissions. So you need that broader base, and when you read into what Manchester Climate Change Partnership says about itself, it's that not only does it have direct control of those 20%, it's also got links to the football fans, the customers, the theatre goers through that partnership, and that's how it's trying to affect change rather than a council-led approach. So thirdly, the third key foundation is agreeing the area's ambition. Now we've seen quite a bit of action around this with the climate emergency declarations, with areas plumping for 2030 net zero, 2028, 2025 in some cases. And although there's different approaches to setting those targets, what we've seen is really vital is that those targets are taken on by the area, and there's a real agreement that this is what is trying to be achieved, rather than it being plucked out the air or not having that kind of groundswell of support from the local area. So agreeing the area's ambition. And then finally, thinking about net zero as being the foundation for all the action by the local government and by other organisations. So going through a process of policy and culture change, resetting all areas of work to be aimed at net zero, so that you're not getting this kind of a climate change team working on some energy projects where whilst the planning department is saying yes to high carbon housing or airports or anything like that, or the transport team are just focusing on potholes without thinking about the transition to low carbon. So how do we get those enabling conditions in place across every local area? And this is where we've made a recommendation on what should happen nationally to try and unlock action in each area. So the recommendation we've gone for is that it should be a statutory duty for each area to create and deliver a net zero action plan. Maybe not on an area basis, maybe on a regional basis, county basis, city basis, but to have that stake and role in a net zero action plan, and by making it a priority for every organisation, by making it a statutory duty, it's an area that could be resourced with funding coming through current environmental levies or new carbon taxes to make sure it's resourced and funded. So the second area I wanted to talk about was the role of local government in collaborating with energy networks. We're lucky to have Steve Atkins here today to talk about how SSCN is engaging with local government. We're seeing, when talking with councils, that that network constraints are one of the major issues being raised as a barrier to work on net zero. So, for example, we did some consultation for Cornwall Council recently, and that with stakeholders that are trying to develop in the area, and that was the number one barrier, was that the network constraints are restricting action. We're starting to see closer working between the networks and local government. For example, Regen's been working with SSEN and WPD on distribution future energy scenarios over a number of years, and that process has in it a feedback loop with local authorities on where new developments are likely and on the level of ambition of those authorities, and the networks are now trying to feed back the results into local government to help with decision making. But there's a need to go further to guide network investment in line with local priorities and ambitions, and it's too important to be left to the privately owned networks. We're starting to talk about, as a nation, about local area energy planning as a tool to facilitate that closer working, which we really support as an idea. This idea of getting really granular analysis into what needs to happen locally and how that goes, that plays into the network planning process. But we think it needs to go further So our recommendation for national change is that there's a role for UK regions in the governance of network planning, so that those local area energy plans aren't just left on the shelf. They're brought into fruition, that they're a key tool in deciding where and when network investment takes place. So the third item, the third item I just wanted to highlight today was around priming the retrofit market. So net zero is only possible with a really widespread amount of retrofit. When we're looking at local areas, some analysis we did in South Gloucestershire, for example, we found that to reach net zero, they'd need 100 retrofits per week. And that level, it needs to be replicated across the country. So to date, we've not really seen that scale in any location. There's been isolated, or not isolated, but there's been attempts to deliver on skills or to use local authority procurement, social housing, communications as the levers for energy efficiency, but not really that joined up and comprehensive rollout that we need. So the paper goes through each of those ideas and sets out some good examples of where they've happened, but the overall recommendation for what should happen nationally is to give control of the funding around retrofit to local governments. So, for example, the energy company obligation should go to be controlled by local government for distribution. And that's something that West Midlands Combined Authority have asked for in their devolution deal. So I'm sure Matthew will talk about that a bit more when he gets the chance on the panel. And then the fourth area I wanted to highlight was around building social permission for radical change. So this was an area that we identified as being really important, but lacking progress so far. So we've seen some movement towards it with the climate emergency declarations, with Extinction Rebellion getting that kind of citizen activism underway and raising awareness. But what we need now is some more mainstream consensus building. Otherwise, there's a risk that there's apathy, that we need 80% of buildings to convert, or more in some areas, to low carbon heating, and we can only do that if people get on board and do those measures. We need to far higher amount of low carbon generation projects. So we're looking at planning policies that allocate areas for wind, for example, but we need that to be with the support of the community rather than fighting against it. So that kind of social permission is something that needs to take place over time, gradually. One option that we're seeing some local authorities exploring is climate assemblies and climate juries. We had the Oxford Assembly at the end of 2019 as a good example, where they've done an education programme over a number of weekends and then put decisions to them to be made. And other examples, for example, in Leeds, where they've gone for a slightly smaller approach of a jury and then taken them through that process and deliberation. And we're starting to see that come out in other areas too, as an idea. But I think there needs to be something bigger, something broader. I'm not sure that just doing a citizens' assembly, as interesting as they are, is going to really get that engagement going across the whole area and get everyone talking about it. So we kind of talked about a local net zero brand and engagement strategy being needed to engage with the democratic voter base. And for that to shape on a local basis, I think what's needed nationally is a national net zero carbon strategy, and using that to drive regular communications on climate issues and policy development. We've seen over the last few months that the government can really focus on an emergency, and although messaging might not always be the clearest, it's there, it's making regular statements and trying to use its voice effectively. So I think that could be translated into the context of the climate emergency and really get some momentum behind this to get the public engaged. So those were the 4 areas I wanted to run through in detail. There's 10 headline recommendations in the document, and more actually in each section. But like I said, I think we'd be there all day if we were to go through each of them.
I think that's great, Hayes, to give people a sense of the breadth of the issues, I think, and there's some detail in the paper for people to flick through, but also some kind of depth. Maybe if we just take the slides off, Hannah, that'd be great. We could just, before we just go into the panel, just to have a couple of questions, I guess. I guess let's just, I think most people on this call are going to be pretty convinced that there's a role for local government, local leadership in this agenda, but just there might be some of the challenges out. I mean, why? Energy national system largely, it's been run centrally by big companies and utilities and national system operators, and for a long time. If I'm an investor or a developer trying to bring forward new energy projects, do energy efficiency in buildings or EV charging or a solar farm or something like that, local authorities, the planning authority, I get that, but does it really have any other influence? Are we just overcomplicating by trying to get all of these local authorities messing around with the energy system, I guess?
Well, I'd say we're not saying it's impossible to act without them. We've seen developments happen. We've seen energy efficiency go in, but it's much easier, and it could all really come together with local government leadership. So by working together to make the planning process simpler, to access communities with householders, with social housing tenants, to unlock the public sector's capital, to communicate opportunities to the public. So all those barriers that investors and developers are facing, they could be lowered through partnership with effective local government, and that's the only way we're going to get to the scale that's needed. So action has happened in the past, but we're talking about net zero, and that's up here.
Okay, excellent. I mean, I think it is when we've worked, as we have a lot with local authorities, it sometimes kind of comes as a bit of a surprise to realise just how much they might own half the land of an area. Sometimes they're the planning authority, the transport authority, they're responsible for sort of leadership in their area. So the potential, it does come home when you think it through. Okay, so just you've given us the kind of nice idea of a net zero town hall. I don't know if you were kind of, as a kid, you like playing with blocks and building building things like that, but it's a nice idea, I think, to bring together that kind of breadth of stuff that we're talking about here, and breadth of roles of local authorities. But I guess there might be someone saying that it's all very well with all your foundations and your pillars. Don't we just need to, let's get on and do some stuff. Let's just do the interesting stuff. Start building some projects. Are we going to kind of get a bit lost in all the foundations and pillars and all that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying, and actually I kind of agree with that statement, that absolutely just doing stuff is what's needed. But we have seen that happening, and areas that have done stuff, that's what they've done. They've focused on something, they've got that done. But if you're talking about net zero 2030, 2050, whichever it is, to get that kind of scale, you can't do it on a piece by piece, exciting project by exciting project basis. It's got to be this coherent process that involves everyone, and those foundations, I think, are really vital to make sure it's not just local government acting on its own, to make sure it is embedded in the local area, and it's really unlocking the potential of other parties, of every party, I suppose. Okay, so the mix of exciting projects that kind of build momentum, quick wins, all those kind of good things, maybe bring in income ideally if you're really lucky, alongside a more kind of structured, coherent, some kind of idea of a plan and where we're all going and bringing everyone together. That's the kind of prescription you've seen working in local government. I don't think anyone's cracked it. I think there are areas that are further ahead, and they tend to be the big cities. When we first thought this paper was going to be our cities and regions paper and with a focus on the cities, but actually it needs to be everywhere, and that's why we've changed the focus and changed the title to be local leadership, because you could have a net zero carbon city, but it wouldn't have a big impact on what we're trying to achieve as a country or as the world if it's not every area, and the resources are very different between a city and of course. So
okay, well, we'll come back to Cheryl, who leads this agenda in one of the kind of great shires of the UK in Cambridgeshire. You showed us some recommendations, nicely presented, kind of 10 key recommendations for government to kind of unlock it. So is it all government's fault? And they're not letting the kind of, is it the dead hand, the Whitehall bureaucrat that's kind of stifling the innovation and great energy in localities? Would Matthew have it all, and West Midlands have it all cracked? I'll ask him later if it wasn't being held back by these. But you know what I'd say. How far can people get if we don't get more power, funding, etc., from central government?
I think that Patrick and Matthew and Cheryl will all have lots to say on this issue. Actually, I think it needs to be recognised that local government can have this innovative role. I was just looking back through my interview notes from people that I interviewed, and someone said that they had their imagination had been withered as local government. I thought that was quite a nice quote, so that they'd been kind of stripped down through austerity and through having to deliver such a huge part of the budget on social care, to not be able to have that resources and free thinking to play that really innovative role. So is it all the central government's fault? I don't think it is. I think that we are seeing areas having taking an innovative approach, looking at creating income streams through different routes that then support action. So those that were there when there was the feed-in tariff party, who've got those kind of investments and income from that, have managed to move on and leapfrog to the next level. Whereas those that were stuck in that with the imaginations and stuck in very delivery phase haven't managed to break out and really get there. So I think it's a combination of both. I think there's more empowerment that could be done, but also I wouldn't want everyone to sit and wait for those national recommendations to take place before they do anything. There's plenty to be done now.
Mm-hmm. Might be waiting quite a long time when it comes to some of it, I suspect. Okay, just spending this time immersing yourself in this topic, talking to a whole bunch of people, and you've obviously worked in this area for 15 years, and probably, as you engage with people, what's the sense you're getting of the kind of the progress? How are people feeling? Do they feeling like, yes, I think we're really starting to get somewhere now, or do you think they're feeling they're sort of fighting against the tide to make progress?
I think that you'll find everyone's at a different place on that spectrum, depending in part on when they joined this kind of working area. I think 2019 was a real turning point with the climate emergency declarations, with the new net zero target nationally. I think that has renewed the focus on decarbonisation, and to a certain extent it had renewed budgets in that area, and really given some focus and impetus. Obviously 2020 has not been the year that we or anyone else thought it was going to be, and so working on this area against a backdrop of 10 years of austerity followed by a national health emergency is going to be very difficult, and it's going to require that real drive and innovation and push to make a difference. But where I've seen people do things, it has come down very much to an individual or a small team who just believe that they can do it, and they're not prepared to give up. They will crack on. Quite often they've got member, a councillor that's championing them, but they're not going to give up. So I would say that's the message to everyone out there. Don't give up, but also take any opportunities that are coming out of the tragic year that we've had. That this commitment to build back better, to see a greener future, and to embrace those positives that we saw coming out of the national lockdown.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think that's a good note to widen and broaden the conversation and bring in our panelists. Please feel free, everyone, to carry on using the chat function. Lots of useful discussion going on there. Good to see you guys starting to kind of talk to each other as well and share stuff. I think Rach posted up the link to the paper. You can Google it as well if you want to flick it through whilst we're talking. And if you want to kind of ask questions, if you put them in the Q&A, now we've got 250 participants. Welcome everyone. So we're not going to be able to take everyone's things, but we'll try and sort of get a sense of the themes that are coming up. There's quite a lot of stuff about the kind of about the impact of austerity, issues of devolved government against central government. People are asking about talking about network infrastructure. The question about whether Regen has an official role in the whole net zero project. We're self-appointed official role, let's put it that way. I'm not sure anyone else has given us an official role, but we've decided that we've got one, so there we go. But there is a man here with an official role, and so we'll turn to Patrick, whose job title is Head of Local Energy at BEIS, Department of Business. Well, I'm gonna let Patrick spell it all out. You're still muted, Patrick.
I hadn't been invited to voice on yet. Business, energy and industrial strategy.
Excellent. So, business, energy and industrial strategy. So head of local leadership, so local energy. So I'm guessing then that, Patrick, that you do, with the title of that, think that local leadership is important, but I've asked each of the kind of panelists to start with, why you think local leadership, why do you think local authorities and local leadership has such an important role to play?
Thanks, Merlin. And I think, and I do, and I'm not sure that I could say this for all those across the whole of Whitehall, but very much so, and that is the sort of raison d'etre of my team in BEIS. And I think there's a number of things there, one of which is around leading by example. That local leadership, you're not going to get the sorts of projects, the sorts of sense of momentum that's needed is not going to hit the daily news cycle on the BBC or in the newspapers, but it will hit the local news cycle on local news and local newspapers. And so I think that lead by example of local authorities doing their own business, working with the rest of the public sector to take that opportunity to lead by example is a really important part of local leadership. That commitment, that narrative, that integration of net zero into their housing strategy, into their transport strategies, into their planning strategies, all of that will make a huge difference to the way that people see and feel the transition. So, think about all of the fleet vehicles that the council owns and controls, and the advertising they've done on the recycle vans to promote recycling, and that's driven a huge uptake. But actually, if those vehicles were electric and you could see them and see them every day on the streets, rather than them being an abnormality, becoming that sense of normality is a really important part of the transition. I think the second part, and you and Hazel were talking about this, were very much around this idea of new norms. So you talked about incumbent businesses, but actually as these vectors come closer together, so heat and power and transport come closer together, there are different opportunities, different business models, different ways that local people can benefit from those systems much more proactively rather than reactively. And I think that again happens at a local level where people come together to buy into schemes, to own schemes, and to run these services. So the idea of, in a small village, the village hall having having solar panels on the roof, providing electricity into an electric car club that anybody can use as a second vehicle in that rural village, shows a real opportunity to use public buildings, to lead by example, but to get people used to those transitions that you mentioned about having a real impact on their day, the way they live their life, their product choices, sometimes even on their wallets. So I think that's a really, really big part of it. And then I think going to Hazel's point, just re-emphasize that about it's not just by the leader of a council or by the head of the director of service. I mean, we're talking about this across the whole of the local area. So you are talking about sports clubs, museums, faith groups. You're talking about communities coming together, parish councils. You're talking about that leadership at all levels of the society that brings people to the subject where they feel comfortable, where they engage with it, where they live their lives now, rather than that sense of momentum being it's all being done to you by the energy companies, by government, we want to make this a proactive, the things that you can do rather than things you can't do, that positive messaging that is much easier to do locally. And then my final point on local leadership is that integration point. Any of you who have worked with Westminster will know that we have over a dozen different departments, each of which have their set rules and responsibilities. And within those, we have teams that have their own rules and responsibilities. So in Bays, we have a heat directorate that looks, and then in that, there are separate teams looking at heat networks, looking at hydrogen, looking at electrification. All of those things are done in teams with a specific national goal. Locally, you can bring all those together in a place with the existing buildings, with the existing culture, with the existing transport system, and actually apply those in practice to the real people, rather than those wonderfully modeled theoretical pieces that we tend to see when we get to the macro level at UK level. One of the questions in the thing was about DAs, and I think there's a really interesting question there about how Whitehall works with DAs on this. So in Scotland, for example, heat and energy efficiency are devolved, but electricity and power is not. So power is a reserved matter. So what does that do when a local place wants to do their energy strategy? If they have no influence over that power side, and yet they want to change everything to electrification. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment with DAs to have those conversations about how we can help take local area energy planning across the whole of the country to bring those strategies together wherever you are in the country.
Excellent. Okay, DAs I think means devolved authorities is probably the reference that Scotland gave way. Patrick, just it was an interesting reference to perhaps not everyone in Whitehall are seeing the importance of small stuff, but just first thing, just to help us set the scene, I know there's a lot coming up over the next kind of few months or due in terms of that's kind of very relevant to this agenda, heat and building strategies and spending reviews. You just want to sort of give people a sense of perhaps some of the key things that they might look out for in the coming months that might shape some of this.
So I think some of them are clearly energy related. So there will be an energy white paper this autumn. There's, as you say, there's a heat and buildings strategy later this year, and both of those will set out sort of the long-term direction of travel for the department on the different parts of energy, and we're looking at alongside that, we're putting in bids at the moment to the spending review. So for those who are in government, every 3 to 4 years, we have a spending review that basically all departments start from zero and you rebid for all of the money for the next 3 to 4 years. So this is a really big statement piece around how much money will be in the net zero space over the next 3 to 4 years. So that's clearly worth looking out for. There's also some work by the CCC coming out, I think, in October, that's looking explicitly at the role of local as they build up to their report on the 6th carbon budget. And then from colleagues in MHCLG, there's a paper on economic recovery and devolution, a white paper that looks at future of various funding streams, such as local growth funding that we had in the last decade, and what happens to those. So some of the local budgets that existed, European funds, local funds, will all be part of that package. So again, worth looking out for that and looking at the opportunities that come out of that.
Okay, so that's some
and all of that before Christmas.
Reshaping of this. Excellent. Okay, well, maybe we'll just stop and come back in a few months once you've got that. Patrick, there's one other thing I was going to pick up there. Hazel mentioned local area energy plans, and this is something that's been talked about quite a lot recently. Ofgem have been talking about it, and Steve will be familiar with the concept now, I think. What's your understanding of a local area energy plan?
So like many of these things at the moment, it means all things to all people. One of the things that my team are looking at the moment is what BEIS's role in this should be. We think that coming off the back of the work that BEIS and partners did on modern energy data, that this should be about integrating energy data from the utility side with local plan data, buildings data, energy demand data, transport system data, so that we get a consolidated and consistent baseline for when we're making decisions. So a council can look at a spatial map of their area or a spatial plan of their area, and when they're looking to build 800 houses, can see what the impact of that decision would be on the networks right from the get-go, so that they can have really informed conversations right from the get-go, rather than making plans and then consulting with people and all of the built-in problems with that. What we are keen to do, and we're working with Ofgem on that, is to create a consistent methodology around this, so that as these are built up from the local area, owned by local authorities, but they have the consistency that you can see over those boundaries. You can see the impacts regionally and nationally, as well as down to parish level if parish councils want to get involved at that, so that you've got a set of consistent data that can be cut appropriately, rather than 75 local authorities all doing these to different methodologies and different metrics, and therefore the people who live on the boundary between two of these don't get any benefit because the join up opportunities aren't there. And I think it's really important that we get to a point where we get that consistency.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Patrick. Let's tease up Steve nicely. Lots to talk about utilities there. Steve, do you want to perhaps introduce yourself and say why, as someone working in the energy sector for a big energy utility, with probably, I don't know, we would know the number, don't we? Because we've done it, we're doing the DFARS with you. There's what, 70 odd local authorities in your licensed areas? Why do you see that role so important?
Yeah, thanks, Merlin. I think, I mean, from our perspective, certainly over the last few years, we've come to realise that working with local communities and commerce is absolutely fundamental to our business. As electricity distribution network, we kind of touch all of the aspects we're talking about: transport, heat, energy, and right through to things like hydrogen as well. And we're increasingly understanding how local knowledge and insights can contribute to improved performance, and how our understanding of net zero outcomes can be achieved. And I think that's definitely drawing on what Patrick said. We absolutely recognise the potential that can be unlocked by empowering local authorities through local area energy plans. And I think this is really, really timely, and we've struggled in the past, I think, or local authorities have struggled in the past, both in terms of expertise and in terms of resource to engage with some of these things. But I think things like the local enterprise partnerships and energy hubs have really contributed to them embracing these areas. And I think, we've seen, as we start to think about our next price control period, how bringing together network operators, local authorities, communities, and wider stakeholders, that these local area energy plans can bridge that gap between aspiration and action. If we collaborate to clearly set out local energy needs, we can target investment better to keep costs down. We can accelerate the transition to net zero. We can think about fairness as well, about nobody being left behind, that we're not just designing the smart grid for the middle classes. And we can work together with local authorities on that. So I think this is a hugely important debate at the moment. As part of our stakeholder engagement program, we've recently hosted events for around these local area energy plans, and they've been tied in with our work with you guys on distribution future energy scenarios. So getting that much more detailed view of what's going to connect to our network in the future, from low carbon technologies such as EVs, heat pumps, smart storage heating, through to the larger scale energy generation and storage projects such as commercial batteries or wind farms, and we're doing that right out to 2050. And I just think that understanding that as part of, understanding stakeholder involvement as part of that is key. So those distribution future energy scenarios, a huge part of that is engaging with local authorities and understanding those aspirations. Whether that's strategic development in terms of domestic and commercial build, but also targets that are out there, such around net zero or the removal of internal combustion engines, climate emergencies, and clearly we can't just take all of those, add them together, and say to the regulator, that's what we need to cover. So we need to kind of test those things.
So Steve, just picking up on that, what you're saying is, just thinking about what might go wrong. So a local area says we're going to go flat out on EVs. We've got bad air quality issues. We want to get to net zero. We're going to put in loads of chargers, and we're going to put in air quality management zones, etc. And then but if you're not preparing your network for that, and if Ofgem isn't funding you to prepare your network for that, then all those plans will come to naught. Essentially, when I plug in my Tesla in a few years, system will say, no, sorry, we're full. As some of the issues perhaps we had with trying to connect solar generation back in the day. Is that the kind of risk that we need to get better at avoiding?
There is a risk there. I think I think we need to be pragmatic about some of these areas, but that is clearly a risk. We have an economic regulator that sensibly is looking at consumer bills and the cost to customers, but at the same time, some of the aspects that we're talking about do require investment. They do require us to spend money on the network in order to achieve those areas. So part of getting ready for the price control is having those discussions, laying them out, making sure there's evidence to support them. So, for example, with Scottish Government and its aspiration for net zero for 2045 is a legally binding target. So from our perspective, we're fairly confident that's going to take place, and also the BEIS figure around heat pumps that's recently been announced. Those are things that have got evidence behind that we can utilise in our plans and reflect in our licence area what it means to support that level of aspiration.
Okay, just picking up on noticing some of the questions coming through. There are some people still challenging, if you like, the utilities, the DNOs, and still taking conventional grid reinforcement approaches, and how say people come forward with ideas and they're just giving them a price, not really looking at innovative ways, smart grid ways, all those kind of nice things. I think there was the example in the questions came from Westmill. Is that fair? Are you DNO still kind of, you give me a project, I'll give you a price, or are they really open to exploring kind of new local energy system ways, new ways of putting things together and reducing the pressure on the network?
I think it's a fair challenge. I think utility companies, certainly distribution electricity systems, DNOs are shifting definitely, and I think we've got a whole kind of portfolio of projects where we're working with local authorities to look at those kind of flexible solutions. So Local Energy Oxfordshire, which is a big innovation trial, looking at a whole range of plug and play projects. In Scotland, working with Scottish Government and some of the island councils around solutions for them. So, there are, we are sort of legacy engineering companies that look at straightforward solutions. But in recent years, in terms of the collaboration with open networks and some of the innovation funding, I think there's been a huge shift to working with local authorities to look at innovative and smart ways of connecting. I mean, most of me and my team are part of energy strategy groups on, for example, Dorset LEP, Oxford LEP, and the idea behind that is to ensure that we're having those discussions face to face, and they know who to approach and who to contact to do that. So part of the stakeholder program that I just talked about, the next stage is to do bilaterals with every local authority within our license area, okay, and to have exactly those discussions.
Okay, I know that's something Western Power Distribution have done as well. I'm not sure others may know about some of the other networks that they've been going through that process as well. So that's clearly something really developing the engagement between utility DNOs and local authorities. I should at this point thank Steve for his sponsorship of this paper. So thank you very much, Steve, making it all possible. Other interested sponsors are always welcome to contact us and for other papers that Region has planned. Okay, let's move. Let's come to Matthew. I mean, you've just introduced yourself, and you're obviously working very much as within local leadership response to this agenda. So clearly, you think it's important. But as someone who perhaps came from the private sector and moved into working with a big, with West Midlands, a big combined authority, with obviously encompassing Birmingham, big urban area. What's convinced you that this kind of more local approach is important?
Well, I guess the background is probably quite important, because I spent 15 years working on the coalface, effectively trying to make projects happen. So I came into the public sector, and the degree to which I've actually entered the public sector is still a bit of a moot point. I'm not formally part of the public sector. I'm a private sector. I'm a elect board member who happens to chair Energy Capital of the West Midlands. I came into it because I was personally convinced that all of the kind of things Hazel was talking about were the key to really making things happen in this space. You can do an awful lot as a community group with your solar schemes and fuel poverty, and there's a whole range of things communities can do. But in terms of moving the dial and actually making fundamental change in places, I think that's the tip of the iceberg of what is what's possible, what's necessary to really make the energy transition happen. And it's really brought home to you when you sit on the board of a local enterprise partnership for someone like Birmingham, and you look at the numbers, the scale, you do the comparative numbers, from where I'd been working and doing district energy schemes where you might, very big project we would have been involved in engineering might be £20 million. And then you look at the financial flows associated with energy in the West Midlands, which is much bigger than Birmingham, Coventry, Wolverhampton as well. Those financial flows are £8 to £10 billion a year. So there's just orders of magnitude of difference, and investment going in, the economic growth and economic development, infrastructure investment in a big city like Birmingham, massive sums of money, which is just representative of the economic and social activity going on. So if you really want to make a difference, I think we have got to change the way we govern that activity effectively, and local activity. You've touched on all these points already, really. Local activity is critical. In fact, Patrick, I think, put it most succinctly, because if we want to do this cost effectively, and if we want to do it quickly, it's the local authorities, it's local people who are able to mobilise the support that's necessary for low carbon activity, which is different, and are able to tailor solutions in the way that enables them to deliver most cost effectively. You can't, if we want a low carbon city, it's not just about putting solar panels on buildings or even building new housing in a carbon efficient way. It's actually about changing the way people travel and the way they work. It's about taking waste heat from factories and piping it into swimming pools. It's about really a total approach to infrastructure, which only a local authority can do, and trying to manage that from the centre it's just unbelievably inefficient. You can imagine trying to do it, but it would involve so much resource compared to having that resource in your local authorities. So that's
Matthew, just to pick up on that. I mean, I think it's fair to say that the West Midlands energy capital has been, the West Midlands have been the most, how do I put this, most active, pushy, if you like, in trying to pull back devolved powers and to try to take more control of the energy system, energy infrastructure in its area, etc. Is that fair to say? And why? And perhaps why have you focused on that rather more than perhaps some other areas that are focused on, building stuff, solar farms and the like?
Well, because I think there's an element of serendipity and opportunism here, because we are the youngest devolved authority. So we were the last DA, as Patrick put it, to start this process. And hence we were closest to this being top of the agenda, I guess. So it was something which the politicians were willing to engage with and put in the devolution debate, which starts very simply, in the case of devolved authorities, what are we looking for devolved powers over? And in the West Midlands, it was transport, housing, skills and energy. So that's the political thing, and that was in 2016. So that's a timing sort of issue. There's a very strong heritage of energy in many parts of the country, but in our part of the country, in the Black Country, which was built on energy. So there's actually a very strong political thrust from not where you would expect it. It's not the community energy groups and the Action 21 type people. It's the industrialists saying we need cheap, clean energy to compete globally. That's what, and therefore, we want, and we see regulations and the way energy costs are and the energy system is managed in the UK as biased, not in favour of cheap, clean energy in the West Midlands. So there's a very local political agenda, but that's always going to be the case. There'll be different things around the country. Does that answer your question? Sorry, you asked. We're asking why, yes. Aren't we?
Yeah.
But if you look at the numbers, so we've got a project in Coventry looking at what how a city might do this, and we did some scenario modelling, and many local authorities have done this. If you cover if you do all the solar projects you could possibly do in Coventry in terms of delivering energy to the citizens of Coventry, you're still in the kind of sub 5% of their energy requirement, right? To deliver net zero in Coventry, you are going to have to get people onto bicycles, you're going to have to do things with the transport system, you're going to have to decarbonise heat and so on. Those are not things that any community energy project or any even well-informed, I'll flatter myself, reasonably well-informed, technically educated engineering person who's done large capital projects, right? I'm not going to do that. I will not make no difference in my lifetime, even though I know the citizens of Coventry and some of the politicians, etc. We have to change the rules. We have to make it different nationally.
Excellent. Okay, let's we'll come back to some of that. I think that Cheryl, you're actually working at the front line of delivering energy projects in this agenda. Just perhaps that first question of do introduce yourself and why local leadership has such an important role to play from your perspective as someone who is delivering local leadership.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start on building on the issue of scale that both Patrick and Matthew identified. So when I think about just the housing retrofit programme that we've got to deliver between now and 2050, so you've got about 29 million homes that you're going to have to do, let's say about 1 million a year. If you compare it to the construction industry's homes that it delivers annually, so about 175,000 homes a year, and you then compare it to the fact that you also need to deliver 1 million retrofits a year. When I look at the supply chain and the coordination that's going to be required locally and with your communities to make that happen, you need to be there on the ground working very, very closely with your communities to help them understand what's needing to be achieved and to get their buy-in. So I think the challenge that we've had to date is that you can work on electricity networks and systems and decarbonising electricity at scale without interrupting everyday life for individuals. Where we're going to, and I think this is what the panel are alluding to, is that individuals are going to have to change their behaviour, their consumption, their homes inside. They're going to be challenged culturally on so many different levels. And not all of them are on the same page as many of us around the panel at the moment. So just on the experience I've had working in communities, you know, they don't know that there's a net zero carbon target. They don't know that if you've got a new home, you can't connect to gas in 2025. And if they've just had a new carpet potentially put in, you're not going to be getting into their home to retrofit it very quickly. So there's one issue, which is about coordinating the levels of skills and scales and supply chain to deliver against this task. So that's the first thing. And I think local leadership can help on that. I think the second thing, and it's also coming to the issue of powers, we do already have quite a number of powers. So you do have local planning opportunities, you've got local transport, you've got economic development incentives that you could be using. So you do need to align those together. And I think sometimes across local governments, especially when you've got different layers, they're not all working to the same, let's say, same outcomes. And so there is something around getting a shared ambition locally that needs to work to deliver against this. I think there's also the challenge, and this will be one which Patrick faces all the time, is that there's also sectors of our powers which are regulated in different ways. So, you know, transport with DFT, okay, they're now going to be coming out with decarbonising transport plans, but that's been a long time coming when you've had BEIS pushing very hard on clean growth. So you've got the local planning powers changing. It's also, there are slightly different nuances between these different strategies and through the different, you know, government departments. So trying to put something in place at a local level to say, well, actually, what that means for us here locally is this, and how do we work with you in the community to make that happen? So I think there is something there. I think Matthew was alluding to the issue that actually some solutions are very local. You know, we've got to become incredibly efficient with our new energy system. No wastage, because when you look at the global demand on our natural environment, why we're here with COVID and the pandemic is we have taken our natural resources for granted globally. And as the middle classes develop across the world and demand for energy and other things, consumption occurs, we've got to learn to be so efficient with what we want to use so that we will live within our limits, within our UK limits, but also within our local limits. So when I think about how you're going to plan your energy systems locally within a national structure, you've got to know what the demand is on site, where you're planning growth and where you're going to be planning new demands, and how you're going to then plan in how to use energy over a 24-hour period, so it's as efficient as possible. So I think you can't plan for efficiency at a national level. You've got to look at it in a more granular level in terms of data and working that through. So, and then I think the other thing that comes into this is just about, you know, where do you just get all your business cases and who's paying for what? And so I think the challenge that a lot of us are facing on the coalface is actually making business cases stack up. And so you do need local authorities with anchor loads coming forward. You do need to use the new growth agenda to be able to facilitate the change. And you do need to think about how, if our energy system is going to involve individuals and their behaviours, but they also can have benefits, how you're going to get them to understand the value that they're going to that they're going to be able to play in the system, so that we can become as energy efficient as possible, but also manage the costs and the prices and get business cases out there. I think Hazel mentioned carbon tax and other funding mechanisms, and I think Matthew looking at other ways of bringing forward you know, energy company obligations to be able to fund infrastructure is really useful. Because at the moment, to try and stack up a business case for low carbon heating as an example, while gas is so low and oil price is low, it's really, really not easy. So the rules do have to change. And I think that's probably it for the moment.
Excellent. Okay. What I think we might do at this stage is just bring the audience in again and have a poll. So we're going to ask probably a slightly simple question about the most important role of local authorities. Hey, Hannah, could you put that up? Okay, I think we're all probably quite familiar with these by now. Nice and so it's a massive oversimplification, and but just to give a sense from this audience. Excellent. Okay, so there's a fairly clear winner there in terms of building societal acceptance, with 40% as the single most important role. Cheryl, that's kind of brings back to kind of a question I was going to ask yourself, and I mean, that's a big task, isn't it? We're talking about bringing the whole population along with us on the scale of change, and you were very articulate about massive retrofit of housing we need. You know, we're going to be dragging gas boilers out of people's homes. You know, how are we going to make that kind of scale of change? And I wonder how, you know, you'll be working a lot with elected leaders, elected government, and on the one hand they've got a lot of pressure, hopefully coming from the kind of young from school strikes and that kind of agenda, and then they're, you know, but they're obviously democratic. They're going to, you know, they're knocking on doorsteps. They're trying to get themselves elected. You know, what do you sort of sense what sort of journey they've been going on this, and how they're seeing that, and how they see their role as democratic leaders in this agenda? Are they followers? Are they leaders? And obviously, it's going to change in different places. But Cambridgeshire, you know, is a kind of, I guess, a true blue English shire is quite an interesting example of that.
Yes, okay, so the youth strikes did have a strong influence when, you know, you have lots of young people turning up on your doorstep every Friday just while you're holding committee meetings. It certainly did make the politicians stand up and listen. And I think it was quite helpful for them to really see the spectrum of issues that young people had as a challenge. So I think that has certainly galvanised a lot of councillors to really get to grips with the climate change and probably the biodiversity challenges that we're going to be facing. In terms of electorate and how moving forward, I think sort of energy is still one of those things that is not the first primary function infrastructure that people think about. But I think it's growing in terms of understanding and appreciation. And so I think there's a lot of work that has had to go on with local leaders to help them understand what the art of the possible is in terms of getting to net zero carbon. You know, that you don't get to net zero with transport if you don't have an electricity system that can support that easily, or hydrogen. But I think one of the really, really big challenges is about how you're going to plan your infrastructure to support your community. And inevitably, you're going to have the community involved in that process in some way. So you were talking about local energy planning. Certainly what we're looking at is how do we energy master plan our area? So how do we look at all the public sector assets as an example, what's going to be coming forward or promoted through the growth agenda, and start working out how to plan infrastructure so that you can take your community, because we've pledged 100% clean energy for our communities through UK 100. So that has to be actively facilitated. And I think politicians do understand that now. And I think they do understand that they've got a big role, but they're also after the jobs. They're looking at, especially coming out of COVID, the green recovery, how are we going to be looking at employment figures and supporting low carbon jobs to come forward. So there's a lot of reasons for them to be involved. In terms of economic growth, or should I say sustainable economy which is thriving rather than growth, because there's a big discussion that needs to be had around what economic development means and what economic growth looks like. But I know that our leader at Cambridgeshire County Council has just started a network called the Countryside Climate Network, which is rural authorities, because sometimes rural authorities feel that they don't have the same level of play into this agenda as the urban, dense boroughs, metropolitans, combined authorities, because the intensity of energy that's used and the numbers of people and the demographics in there. So our leader is leading a network which is about how can rural populations start playing their part in facilitating some of this change, because what you have there is land and alternative natural mechanisms that you can also build on. So does that help?
Excellent. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we're starting I think it's societal acceptance, as our audience has pointed out to us, is going, of the scale of change that we're going through is an absolutely critical issue.
Yeah.
Issue, isn't it? And if, I don't know, if you go back 10 years ago, there were certain people who weren't very keen on wind farms, and now we have in England essentially a ban on wind farms. So, there are, and we still have it, all these years later, when we didn't sufficiently perhaps bring the public with it. So it's interesting to see people picking that out. I was going to speak about you raised the issue of housing retrofit. I mean, that's one of the massive challenges, isn't it? Decarbonising heat. And if you set yourself, 2030 zero carbon challenge as a local authority, that means, everyone's heating's got to be decarbonised. Local authorities' powers in that area are, limited. So I think we've pointed out in the paper, some of the, they don't control the eco funding. They don't, all the taxes on your energy bill are largely on the electricity, not on gas, and they all go to central government. And as I said, there's not, it's a difficult area for local authorities. I might come to Patrick on that. Are we, do you think the housing decarbonisation plan, et cetera, is going to unlock local authorities' ability to really grapple with the scale of that kind of challenge?
So I think again, there are very different sections of the housing market, and there will need to be different solutions. So, obviously the Green Homes Grant is out there, £2 billion to do retrofit immediately. The Conservative manifesto had 9.2 billion for energy efficiency of buildings in the manifesto last November. So the size and scale of the problem is clearly recognised by government. We're working with finance organisations to introduce green mortgages so that there's an opportunity to pay for those improvements when you purchase homes. So where, not just thinking about what you have to do, but where in your sort of life cycle of housing you might make those changes. So I think it's very difficult to see things like eco, which is an energy company obligation, and therefore doesn't flow through government in any shape or form at the moment, being repurposed in some form of taxation that could then be given to local authorities. I think as it stands at the moment, the relationship between the way it is set up and what you are asking is very, very difficult to deliver without significant political, significant legislative process. But I mean, the work in the Southwest around Finapol and trying to set up with a finance company looking at local loans for energy efficiency. There's lots and lots of things starting to look at that finance model. One of the things that we're interested in with the hubs is this idea that you do area-based, so you do the retrofitting as part of a social impact investment that also does the heat, also does EV charging, and you looking at doing an area-based, so you can use some of the more lucrative energy projects to counterbalance in that investment model some of the less lucrative or commercially viable projects, so that you're getting a portfolio and spreading that that investment. And you know, we've just seen DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, launched last November an Impact Investment Institute to look at how they can work with investors around not just taking a purely monetary value back out of it, but actually looking at what social benefits they might want to get out of that as well. And we've had a number of conversations with pension funds and with other organizations who are really interested in this idea of still getting a return, but not necessarily as much of a return, because they can show what impact their investments are having. And that has a very place-based origin. People want, sort of investors want to be able to say, and we have done something about fuel poverty in Bristol or Brighton or Birmingham. They don't want to say, well, you know, somewhere in the landmass somebody has benefited. They want to be able to point to sort of a big scale of impact. And I think that comes back to that local leadership and that ability to create supply chains through economies of scale by focusing in one place. And that's the basis of the Green Homes Grant is not just about retrofit, but about skills and about bringing people back into work and the economic benefits of that those jobs will bring long term to a place, to an area.
Okay, Matthew, this point about the powers that local authorities have and the ability to make change happen at the moment, you know, should you guys be focusing on just getting on and doing stuff, or you know, do you need, as some of the recommendations in the paper are suggesting, to kind of, you know, to release powers and funding from the centre if you're going to really make a difference at the kind of scale we're talking about?
Yes, I was really eager to get in there because I wanted to just come back at Patrick on the point about eco and it being too difficult because it's legislative change, and currently that's funded through energy market levies. Because I think this is the absolutely fundamental point here. Currently, the UK energy system, including fuel poverty activity through eco, so housing counting as UK energy infrastructure, is funded through energy levies on your bills, whether you're a business or a household, right? That's how we fund energy in the UK. Right, hold that thought. We're now talking about decarbonising the UK energy system. So we're talking about shifting the way we invest in the energy system to make it zero carbon rather than what it is at the moment. Redirecting investment flows, which amount to billions of pounds a year in the energy system to make it zero carbon. That's the fundamental problem facing the nation, and it's about the most efficient way of doing that. If, as government, we say that's too difficult, we can't do that, we recognise communities and local authorities have a point, but we want them to do it by other stuff outside the energy market levies. We're not going to tackle that because it's too difficult. We are adding cost, one way or another, to the citizens of the UK through the tax system and the energy market levy. So you're basically, from the beginning, making this more expensive than it needs to be, okay? What we should be doing is reshaping the way we fund energy infrastructure investment so that it's using the most efficient means possible to deliver zero carbon in the fastest time possible. And I think we actually all agree, and Patrick and I have talked about this quite a lot over the last few years, we all agree that local authorities and communities have got quite a big role to play in that, right? So what we need to do is redirect some of the flows within the energy system to local authorities and communities to make it happen. It's that simple.
Excellent. Patrick, do you want to kind of comment? I'm not the minister, or respect your limitations of anything to do with the Treasury, etc. Just maybe it references a little bit your point that not everyone in Whitehall sees the importance here of local action in energy.
So I mean, the fundamental point that Matthew makes, I agree with entirely. The point I make about eco and changing eco in particular is purely a time one. With all that is happening in Parliament at the moment, the idea of getting primary and then secondary legislation through within this Parliament is almost unthinkable. And therefore, you are stuck with this way of funding it until at least 2025, even if we started working on it now as part of Eco 4. So I think it's a question of the size of the challenge in the next 4 years is astronomical. The size of the challenge going beyond that is also very large. But if we don't do stuff now and really start to accelerate what we're achieving now, it gets to a point sooner rather than later where 2030, 2035, 2038 are just not achievable at all. So my point was not about whether we should do it or not, was that we need to find a way to fund that retrofit in the short term. That is very different, because we need to be doing that work now. The other thing I'd just say, and it's splitting hairs a little, is that ECO is set up to do a specific thing for a very small specific part of the housing market. You know, it's a fuel poverty. It's aimed at the worst of the worst properties. We've opened that up a little with the local flex program within it. It's not going to solve all of your problems remodeling that. You know, the scale of the issue is significantly bigger than ECO delivers against year on year, and we need to find ways to extend that rather than just focus on it. But that's, I mean, again, it's a technical issue, but you know, the vast majority of houses are not eligible for ECO. Wouldn't be eligible for ECO if we gave the money to the local authorities, because we still need to deal with that specific worst of the worst in society to make sure that that issue around fuel poverty and heat or eat and all of those types of slogans, that's what that money is focused to do. So there are bigger challenges and bigger funding issues in retrofit than just that.
Okay. Hayes, I might just come back to you at this point about that. You know, that seems to be the decarbonising heat, sorting out UK's leaky cold buildings. You know, that seems to be the fundamental, the biggest challenge that whenever anyone does a kind of zero carbon plan for their area and starts to really look at that, that's the bit that they start to stumble on. And they, you know, I remember one local authority I won't mention setting a very ambitious zero carbon target, doing its plan, and then talking to the leader of the council who had said, well, that's great, but there's just no chance we're doing that. You know, that's crazy. That's you know, that's ripping boilers out of people's houses, and we're just not in that space yet. Is that an area you think people are struggling with, or do we see good progress in some of the local authorities you're engaging with?
Yeah, so I wanted to just come in on that point around rethinking funding and eco, so just quickly, just because I think there are a fundamental mind shift in terms of, at the moment, local authorities that are accessing funding are doing it through the kind of competitions. So, you know, things like the EV charger competitions, through accessing support from heat networks unit, for example. And I think that my overall finding with this paper is that needs to change. It can't be that it's a competition that those that are furthest ahead are always going to win, and then those that are behind like don't even have people to write the funding bids to access that funding. So the thinking in terms of that recommendation, building on what Matthew's been thinking about in terms of eco, is that we just need to change how we finance energy in the local area, so that all that money that's flowing through the energy system, through customer bills, so a proportion of it can be spent locally on the infrastructure that's needed. And that's kind of a fundamental change. Thinking about your question there, Merlin, on decarbonisation of heat, Regen put out one of our other Decade to Make a Difference papers at the start of the year on that topic in particular, and it's kind of explored the real detail. But when talking to the local authorities, that it is a real stumbling block because of the lack of a national strategy on heat. So you straight away get into conversations around on gas properties and what's going to happen to them. Are they going to convert to heat pumps? Are we talking about hydrogen? Are we talking about blending? And it kind of presents almost a wall that's impassable, that that people don't know the answer for those on gas properties, and so it kind of blocks action, I think, on that. And we've seen examples of people coming back and saying, well, we don't know whether to do energy efficiency, because if we move to to hydrogen, then maybe we don't need the same level of energy efficiency as we do with heat pumps. And our response to that is, yeah, of course you're always going to need energy efficiency. Let's minimise the amount of energy spend that we have, rather than carrying on with a high energy household. But I think we do need some national leadership on that heat issue to try and unlock progress. We've got some areas that are working hard on district heat, and that's great. But then we see, when it comes to the fruition of those programs, that the energy provision, the energy solution that goes with them, isn't low carbon, and there's future plans to convert to low carbon, but it's not necessarily coming through. I'm going to stop there and pass to Cheryl.
Thank you. Cheryl, you sort of brought up the issue of retrofit and decarbonising housing and stuff at the beginning, so you kicked something off there. Do you want to kind of reply to what you've heard there?
Well, okay, so you've got, as you say, the gas connected community, and then you've got the oil connected, or the oil-based communities. So I think for me at the moment, I'm targeting the oil-based communities to try and see how to get those off. And when undertaking that type of work, so we're trying to retrofit a whole village called Swaffham Prior, the most sensible approach is to be able to use heat in the ground and heat from the air to be able to support this village over long term by putting in some facilitating infrastructure like a district heating network. And one of the really great things about doing that is you also take this issue of ability to pay away. Because one of the challenges that I've been facing in some of these villages is that the uptake of finance incentives is really your ability to pay upfront. And so there's a whole bunch of people who would be willing to contribute in some way, but just can't now, for whatever stage in their life, pay up front. So finding a solution that takes that first barrier away is really important. Then finding the solution that will actually engage the community to say, yeah, we do want to sign up to renewable heat, is the second big barrier. And that barrier is then around the fact that if you don't believe in the environment as your first driver, and it's an economic one, it's, well, what is the economic incentives to change? And that is one of the big challenges we're facing. The other issue which you're raising around gas networks, I was challenged with Swaffham Prior of saying, are you going to be putting in an asset which is a stranded asset over time? And it'll be interesting to hear what Matthew thinks here, because wouldn't it be simpler just to connect this to the gas network? But that's not going to happen for another 15 years potentially. And coming through with like biogas, which is methane, which is, you know, needs a supply. And so, or is it hydrogen, which is going to take up 20% and just displace 20% of your gas supply coming through? So I think there is an issue that you can also wait too long for other solutions coming forward. And it's about going, what's really good and looks good now and actually is going to sustain up till 2050, just get ahead and do it if you can finance it. So I agree we do need direction on gas, and I'm interested to know Matthew's view on whether he thinks that, you know, biogas is going to be the solution coming forward or not.
It's Regen, in doing our net, we did a project called Net Zero South Wales actually, and we were looking at the different pathways and the pathway, the kind of electrification pathway and the gas pathways. Yeah, as you say, a lot of debate. I don't think anyone sees biogas as the whole solution, because there just isn't enough bioresource out there. But the potential of, say, electrolysis to produce a lot of hydrogen is an interesting one. Matthew, you've been asked for your view. Yeah.
Yes, I regret mentioning that I had a vaguely technical background many years ago, earlier in the conversation. I hate answering questions like this, but on this occasion, we've looked at something very similar in the West Midlands, and the answer we came to was that electricity was actually the future, probably. So I wouldn't go for gas, no. If you look at the future, this is a role for national government, and the kind of thing that they don't need local government to help with, really. I think if you look at the national projections for the carbon level of carbon in electricity by 2050, it's virtually zero. So if you're thinking of, I mean, there's a cost issue potentially, but basically from a carbon perspective, gas won't be able to compete in any way. I can't see it making sense to go to biogas or hydrogen in Swaffham Prior now.
There you go. Yeah, you got your technical advice. Steve, I'm going to a quick comment on some of those decisions about decarbonisation and off gas grid and gas. You know, I mean, I guess this plays to you guys in terms of if we all electrify. Well, you know, firstly we're electrifying the whole vehicle fleet, so that whole world of tankers coming in and refineries and petrol stations and that whole energy chain is kind of going onto your network. And now we're taking the whole heat energy chain, and according to Matthew's scenario, where that's all going onto your network as well. How is it going to cope?
I think probably the key one is to bear in mind that you know we've been mandated to run an economic and efficient network for years now, and so that network has you know not had to cope with some of the things that we mentioned. So what we're trying to do is, as we kind of embrace the smart grid and these low carbon technologies, all of which seem to kind of come down to electricity, even hydrogen, is work out how we accommodate those in a way that doesn't increase cost. It just goes through the roof. Flexibility is a key part of that. Things like smart charging, being able to manage our use of those, working with suppliers in terms of tariffs as well, to make sure that usage is kind of pushed to particular areas of the day. Certainly. And also not being too hung up on technologies. When we talk about electrification of heat, you know, we're not just talking about heat pumps, smart storage heating. We're using really effectively in our Scottish Islands, and in conjunction with renewable, absorbing the massive renewable generation that we've got available up there, and in doing so, taking some of the pressure off of the network. But I think this just goes back to my previous comments that, in order to do this, there needs to be some investment. You know, we need to invest in the network to accommodate this, and so you know that needs to be reflected. You know, when we're setting price control for the for the next 5 years. Making sure that networks are able to accommodate those aspirations.
Okay, and just there's been quite a lot of coming in the chat and the questions around the kind of smart grid and smart local solutions, and I guess there's a kind of concept here, and whilst we're thinking about local, about rethinking energy from the bottom up. It's not something that's coming down anymore through big power station down through your network into my plug. You know, a lot of it is now generated locally by Cheryl or in Cambridgeshire or her villagers, or all of us, in lots of different ways. And therefore, rather than trying to balance all at the centre through a national grid system, isn't there just lots more we could do to reduce and balance locally and reduce the pressure on for more infrastructure? And there's lots of trials, and we're part of. There's a whole number of Innovate funded smart energy local design system trials, and I know you guys involved in some as well. And you mentioned Leo in Oxford. So there's a lot of trials going on, and most of them I think do have local authorities involved in them. But is that an area we're moving fast enough in, or is it exact? Is there an exaggeration there? And however smart we get, we're still going to need good old-fashioned pipes and wires to actually get electrons and molecules around the country.
We're still going to need it to make use of resources that are in the middle of the North Sea, so offshore wind and stuff like that we want to be able to distribute around the country. So yeah, but I think that local element is absolutely key. I mean, most of the smart grid discussion around flexibility has been taken up by DSO services, so battery storage, providing services to the networks and what have you. But I think that's soon going to be surpassed by peer-to-peer transactions of energy, of constraints, of capacity. We've got swathes of capacity on the network that is held by people that don't utilize it, but we have to keep it there just in case they change their mind. So if people are able to trade that locally, that could release significant capacity on the network. So I think as DNOs, it's not just about for us. What we need to be able to do is to be able to facilitate those transactions and give visibility to people in terms of data sets, so they can see, what's available locally and be able to enter into those transactions. And that helps increase resilience as well. More and more local solutions increases resilience for the network.
Might be an opportunity to actually plug a earlier webinar, which is, I think, came under the phrase of MEDI, if I'm right, by Innovate UK, who have launched a new competition for funding for local energy data applications that use, if you've got clever ideas, anyone on this call who wants to build an app that's going to use various forms of data to do clever things at a local area, then there's 100% funding from Innovate, and Regen has just done some preparatory work looking at all the local use cases, and there's some documents that you can refer to help inspire you in that. So there's quite a lot going on in that space, but clearly from the questions also quite a lot of people feeling like it's still pretty hard to actually get this, and they see lots of good talk and trials, but they're actually not quite sure how to actually get these sort of projects really going as business as usual, if you okay. Conscious we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll start to kind of bring things towards a close. We've still got 183 participants out of the over 200, so I think that's well done, everyone. You've clearly managed to keep everyone's attention for nearly 2 hours talking about local energy, so that's fantastic. So I'll just come back to the last kind of a last point. I mean, it seems, when we look at the paper, and the paper is full of examples of great and exciting things going on, and and you hear from Matthew what's going on in West Midlands, and Cheryl, amazing things they're doing in Cambridgeshire. You do think there's this huge amount of energy and activity, but yet not on the scale enough we need. Hayes, is that from again, just from your experience of writing the paper and working on it, what, could you, is it just a question of everyone kind of looking around and being inspired by all the things that are going on, or is it a more fundamental shift as your kind of final thought?
I was just thinking about what you were going to ask, and I thought that was a good summing up point. And I'd look back at my notes, and when we were first talking about this,
it's like we planned
it is, but we didn't. Just in 2019, we started talking about climate emergency, and lots of areas took on this net zero target, and we had this phrase about the ambition gap being closed, and now it's about the execution gap, and how we actually get there. And I think there's something around not needing to know 100% how we get there, so not needing to have every single action lined up, and just getting going and doing stuff and trying stuff and seeing if it works and sharing information. So all the things that we've talked about today, really, and using the support that's out there and trying to get experts into local authorities to support them to do that. But then again, on the other hand, I haven't seen anywhere that's really gone into emergency mode and put climate emergency at the forefront. Obviously, we've had other issues with COVID, but we need to really do that, lining up everything in a row as an arrow looking at the target. So, whether or not we meet net zero 2030, 2050, we need to aim to get there, I think, and really take on that ambition and do stuff.
Call to action. Thank you, Hazel. Excellent. Patrick, a final comment from yourself. Perhaps you mentioned that as head of local energy, you're passionately committed to the role of localities in this. You sort of hinted that perhaps across Whitehall, not everyone shares that view. And and hearing today, I think it'd be hard not to think that there is a huge role for local authorities in many of these areas. I mean, is there more that we could do to convince Westminster that Whitehall that this is a national effort and we need to release the ability for localities to help drive it?
So I mean, there's always more we can do. So I mean, evidence is a massive issue. You talk about the number of projects going on, but the vast majority of them are not evaluated. So lots of small projects unevaluated. The evidence is really hard to pull together for us to do future funding. So we paid Strathclyde University to look at 123 local energy projects. They couldn't come to any conclusions whatsoever on the value added of doing it locally. So I think there is still a big business case side of this. Inherently, in our hearts and in our minds, I think we know that it has a role, but it is not yet evidenced in a way that I could take to Treasury under the Green Book and say, give me £1 billion, give me £5 billion to upscale the local side of this challenge, because they will deliver A, B, and C. Rosie, I quite agree that the Green Book needs to change, but that is a different fight for a different day. So I think there's that side of things, and I think also the case studies. So the ones that have been successful, places like Fintree's community energy program with their wind turbine, some of the stuff that Manchester do, some of the stuff that Bristol do, they're very, very good at telling their story. They have people there who are very good at telling a story. The vast majority of these projects that we're talking about are done by people who want to get the project done and want to get the benefits done. So the story they don't see the value of the story. And so that story isn't told, and their local politician doesn't know it. Their local councillor doesn't know it. Their mayor doesn't raise it with the Secretary of State when they meet to talk about what else they want to see more of. So I think there's a real storytelling and building the community. And Marika's in the audience somewhere, and she's doing some work with us through UKRI and Energy Systems Catapult at the moment. to try and build up a sort of online community where these stories can be told and shared and brought together to create a sense of momentum and a sense of direction, rather than there being 1,000 flowers, but everybody can only see one. What does the actual whole thing look like?
Excellent. Okay, well, it's always an interesting day when Bayes officials quote Mao Zedong. So thank you for that, Patrick. Matthew, I think it's sort of your last comment, and perhaps a sort of bit of a right of reply on that as well.
So, which last comment? You'll need to remind me.
Well, we're just coming towards the end, so this is your final chance.
Oh, my last comment. No, sorry, I thought you were asking me to reply to somebody else's. Which I wanted to make a positive note and say, I think we are actually making progress. You know, I set out on this most recent path of trying to, I guess, what naively drive a bit of fundamental change and political change and try and tackle some of these energy market levies, etc., starting with the easiest one, Patrick, eco, but the most obvious one. I'm still going 3 or 4 years later, because I every couple of months I look back and I think, have we actually made progress? And I do actually think we're making progress. I think it's too slow, and the further we go, the more in some ways depressed I get about the depth of kind of deep cultural challenges we've got here. So I don't believe there's anyone in Bayes or the Treasury who's sitting there going, you know, we must stop this conspiracy or conspiring to prevent local energy. I think maybe everyone supports it, but it's really difficult to make stuff happen because they want evidence and all these kind of things, which is just difficult to get from massively diverse small projects, etc. So I wanted that to make that positive message. The second point, very, very briefly, going quite a long way back in the conversation. So at the moment, we're talking a lot about local area energy plans as something good that we could do. And of course it is, and it provides a kind of tool that will support people. But I think it's a little bit sad that the focus is on the plan and not on the planner. So for me, this is a people problem. And I think we'll have got there when we've got not just one person, but teams of people in not necessarily local authorities, but in the right place, because I'm not sure local authorities, you know, that covers a multiplicity of lovely places and lovely people who are on this call, but they're all very, very different. So I think we've got to think through a little bit the boundaries, but then it's about having the right teams of people who understand their place, understand the issues of that place, and understand the electricity companies and the gas companies and hydrogen, and can answer Cheryl's question in a more credible way than I can. It's the people that are the solution, not the plan. And having a national focus in this area on a local area energy plan is slightly offbeat. It's the planners that we need.
Excellent. Okay, that's actually, I think that's a very good point, Matthew. Cheryl, did you want to make a final quick comment from?
The only comment I was going to make was I totally agree about its people and people changing culture and changing consumption patterns. But it's also about how we get the long-term funding, because, you know, just for example, the Green Homes grant that came through recently, trying to put together a bid which takes time and money, and then deliver in very short timelines, and then you can apply next year if you can't manage to do it this year, and then it's competitive. Until we get a very clear funding regime moving forward, we're going to be stop, start all the time, and we can't afford to stop at all in terms of the scale of the challenge. So that's where we need to really focus some efforts.
Excellent. Thank you, Cheryl. That's definitely come across loud and clear. I think it's in the paper, and it's definitely actually there was an early bit of the comment in the chat bit was about whether you've applied for that grant and the challenges that came with it. Steve, that gives you, perhaps befitting as the sponsor, actually, it gives you a final your final comment.
Well, I think from my perspective, the key part is, you know, over the next few years, there's some really, really important decisions to make that relate to energy networks, and they're far too important to be left to us. You know, as in our energy silos, you know, we can't determine what's needed in your regions, in your local areas, without consultation and without partnership. And I think that's absolutely key. I think a plea from me, probably to government, to BEIS, is around just clear direction of whether that comes from individual local authorities or whether that's LEPs and energy hubs. I'd like to see those probably given more support, because I think those regional decisions need that integrated approach. But yeah, as I said, big important decisions, far too important for us to make in our silos.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. References a paper we wrote back in the last year called Energy Networks for the Future, where we put, and we've referenced again in this paper, our thinking about a more regional sort of governance, if you like, of energy networks, and how Cheryl and her colleagues in the east of England might have a more statutory role in setting out the infrastructure that they think is required for their plans, rather than that will be done as a centralised process. So anyone wants to see how that might work, then Region's Energy Networks for the Future paper, I can reference you to. Hannah, do you want to just put up the final slide and just to prompt people what's coming up? I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to try my best to sum up today. You know, we covered a lot of areas. I think, you know, what really strikes me is the level of knowledge and expertise and if I could use the word energy that is there across the country, and I think you know, Patrick is a great champion for that within government, but I think there's still not enough recognition within the centre that you know, many of these solutions need to be local, and that by devolving power, responsibility, and funding, there's a great deal that can be achieved. So hopefully some of that will come out of the set of papers that Patrick has talked to us about coming up, and you know, that over the next few months, and as the UK puts out it's also got its nationally determined contribution coming up to COP26, got announcements about transport and possibly bringing EVs. We're hearing rumours of bringing the end of the fossil fuel engine to 2030. So we're going to see really quite a significant set of announcements and plans, and perhaps of, you know, the heating and decarbonisation one right up there is at the heart of that, an absolutely critical role for local government. So, you know, Regen's worked with local government for all our time, all our existence, and local leadership, and that's something we're completely committed to carrying on doing. And so I, you know, as a final point you again towards the paper to flick through some of the great examples that are going on, and also give you thought about what a kind of structured approach to this might look like at a local level. Coming up, we have another couple of sessions coming up for you with we call them the leading the energy transition as part of the sort of green recovery. Talking to Fiona there at Octopus Electric Vehicles, someone right in the heart of trying to think through some of these new approaches and new solutions, and picking up on quite a lot of the stuff we've talking about today. And be interesting to see whether we have a white paper on energy by then. Probably not. Declan Burke, Director of Clean Power Strategy and Deployment at BEIS. So Patrick's colleague will be doing kind of I'll be doing one-to-one 1 hour interviews. So you won't need quite so much stamina for those. So those are coming up. Only remains for me to say bang on 4 o'clock to thank panel very much for participating. Thank you all. It's been really great to have you. It's a really fascinating debate and plenty of passion and energy as well, which is great to see. Thank Hazel and others at Regen, of course, for all their work on the paper and indeed more generally on this agenda. Thank everyone actually out there in sort of local leadership and local areas, who's in communities, who've been working away at this agenda for many a year. Many of you are doing some great stuff, and I know that it hasn't always been the easiest thing to do. So thank you for all your hard work and commitment, and thank you to everyone for coming along and participating. Today we had well over 250 people. We're still at about 150, so we haven't bored too many of them. So, you know, normally at this point I'd wish you all a safe journey home. obviously that's not quite so relevant for most of you now, so I'll wish you a safe journey back to the kitchen for a cup of tea, and look forward to seeing you all again shortly. Well, thank you.